When my grandfather passed away, he left me his house. It was a beautiful two-story craftsman in an old, quiet suburb, the kind of place with mature trees and established roots. I was thrilled. It was a chance to escape my cramped city apartment and reconnect with my family's history. The centerpiece of the property, and my favorite thing about it, was a massive, ancient oak tree that dominated the backyard. Its branches were as thick as my body, and its canopy provided a perfect, dappled shade. It was a living monument, and I loved it instantly. The day after I moved in, I met my neighbor, Mr. Blackwood. He was an elderly, reclusive man who lived in the house next door, a place that seemed as grim and unkempt as he was. He shuffled over to the low chain-link fence that separated our properties, his eyes, small and dark, fixated on the oak tree. "You, that tree," he said, his voice a dry, scratchy whisper. "Its roots are cracking my foundation. Its leaves clog my gutters. The property line cuts right through the middle of it. I want it gone." I was taken aback by his bluntness. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me," he rasped. "I told your grandfather the same thing for 50 years. The tree needs to come down. It's a nuisance." I tried to be polite, to be a good new neighbor. "Well, sir," I said with a tight smile, "I have no intention of cutting it down. It's a magnificent tree." He just stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then shuffled back into his dark house without another word. This was the opening salvo in a war I didn't even know I was supposed to be fighting, when the conflict started small, in a passive-aggressive way. Any branch from the oak that crossed the property line was immediately and crudely sawn off, the severed limbs left to rot on my lawn. I started finding strange things placed neatly at the base of the tree's trunk on my side of the fence. A dead squirrel, a scattering of broken glass, a single muddy work boot. It was deeply unsettling. A series of silent, creepy messages. I decided to install a security camera, a small one tucked into the eaves of my house, pointed directly at the oak tree and the fence line. For a week, nothing happened. Mr. Blackwood seemed to have retreated. I started to hope the conflict had died down. It was during this time that I decided to clean out my grandfather's old office. In the back of a dusty filing cabinet, I found a stack of old, leather-bound journals, and I sat down that night and began to read them. My grandfather's elegant cursive detailed his life in the house, and as I read, a cold dread began to seep into my bones. He wrote about his neighbor, Mr. Blackwood, and the feud over the oak tree. It had indeed been going on for decades, but it wasn't just about leaves and roots. An entry from 1975 read, "Arthur Blackwood was at the fence again today, raving. He says the tree is sick, that it whispers to him at night. He blames it for his wife's disappearance. He's losing his mind." I frantically flipped through the pages. His wife Eleanor had vanished without a trace in the summer of 1974. She had been in their backyard and then she was gone. The police had suspected Blackwood, but they never found any evidence. According to my grandfather's journal, Blackwood became convinced that the ancient oak tree had somehow taken her. It's another entry from 1982. He's leaving things by the trunk again. Dead birds. Old photographs of Eleanor. He told me he's making offerings, trying to appease it. He believes something lives in the hollows of its branches. God help him. I think he's gone completely mad. I put the journal down, my hands trembling. This wasn't a petty property dispute. I was living next to a man who had been consumed by a 50-year-long delusion, a paranoid obsession that had now found a new focus. Me. The dead squirrels and the broken glass weren't just threats. In his mind, they were part of a ritual. That night, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the security camera. I pulled up the live feed. In the grainy black and white night vision, I saw Mr. Blackwood standing in his yard by the fence, but he wasn't trimming branches or throwing trash. He was standing perfectly still, his head cocked, as if listening to something. He then knelt down, placed a small dark object at the base of the mighty oak, and began to whisper to it, his hands pressed against the rough bark. He stayed like that for almost 10 minutes. Then, he slowly stood up, turned his head, and stared directly into the camera lens. His face was a mask of pure, cold malevolence. He knew I was watching. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I went outside, my heart pounding. I looked at the base of the tree where he had been kneeling. The object he had left was a small, tarnished silver locket. I didn't touch it. I looked at the trunk of the tree on my side of the property line. Carved deep into the bark were 3 fresh, jagged, parallel lines, like the claw marks of some massive animal. As I stood there staring in horror, Mr. Blackwood emerged from his house. He shuffled to the fence, a thin, triumphant smile on his lips. "See?" he whispered, his dark eyes glinting. "I told you. It's hungry, and it knows you're here now." I moved out a month later. I couldn't stand the feeling of being watched, not just by the madman next door, but by the ancient silent tree that was the subject of his terrifying obsession. I sold the house to a developer who planned to tear it down. I assume the oak tree is gone now. I hope it is. I moved into the Kensington, a modern, upscale apartment complex because it felt safe and anonymous. I was a young woman living alone in a big city, and the building's security features, key fob access, cameras in the hallways, were a major selling point. I'm a creature of habit. My life runs on a predictable, comforting routine. The same corner coffee shop every morning, the same 6 p.m. spin class, the same brand of running shoes, the same takeout place on Fridays. It's a quiet life, and that's how I like it. My new next-door neighbor in apartment 2B moved in about 2 months after I did. Our first meeting was brief and unremarkable. He was a man in his late 20s, with plain features and a quiet demeanor. He introduced himself as Mark. He seemed perfectly normal, if a little forgettable. The mimicry started small, so small I didn't even register it as mimicry at first. A week after he moved in, I saw him at my coffee shop. It's a small, independent place, not a big chain. I thought it was a nice coincidence. Then I saw him at my gym. He wasn't in my spin class, but he was there on the treadmills. A few days later, I was leaving for a run and saw him locking his door. He was wearing the exact same running shoes as me, a fairly niche, brightly colored model from a Swiss brand. "Hey, nice shoes," he said, pointing at my feet with a small, shy smile. "We have the same great taste." I laughed it off. It was weird, but it was just a series of coincidences, right? But the coincidences continued to pile up. I drive a dark gray Mazda 3. 2 weeks later, a brand new dark gray Mazda 3 was suddenly parked in the spot next to mine in the garage, the spot assigned to apartment 2B. At this point, I told my friends about it. They thought it was funny, maybe a little creepy. "You have a secret admirer," my best friend teased. "He's trying to find things in common with you." But it didn't feel like a crush. It felt like I was being studied. The mimicry then moved from possessions to personal choices. I got a new haircut, a sharp, angular bob with dark red highlights, something I had wanted for years. The following Saturday, I saw Mark in the lobby with a woman I'd never seen before. Her hair was cut and dyed in the exact same distinctive style as mine. The resemblance was so jarring it made me stop in my tracks. Mark just smiled his quiet smile and led her out the door. I started to feel a crawling psychological dread. I felt like I was being erased, my individuality being copied and pasted onto this stranger's life. He started using phrases and expressions that I used, things he had overheard me saying on the phone in the hallway. I felt a constant, low-level panic like my identity was being systematically stolen piece by piece. I started to change my routines, going to a different gym, ordering coffee from a different place. But it was too late. The pattern was set. The climax of this slow, terrifying invasion of self came on a Tuesday evening. I came home from work to find a package outside my door. It was from an online clothing store I frequently used. It was addressed to me, apartment 2A, but I hadn't ordered anything. I took it inside, my hands trembling, and opened it. Inside was a men's leather jacket, a very unique vintage-style design. It was the exact male equivalent of a jacket I had spent an hour looking at online the night before. A jacket I had saved in my cart, but ultimately decided not to buy. As I stood there, holding the jacket, the horrible truth crashed down on me. He had hacked me. My email, my accounts, my Wi-Fi. He wasn't just observing my life from the outside, he was inside it, watching my every click, my every thought. At that moment, the door to apartment 2B opened. It was Mark. He was wearing dark jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. The same dark jeans and plain gray t-shirt I was wearing at that very moment. He wasn't smiling. He just looked at me, then at the jacket in my hands and said, in a perfect, chilling imitation of my own speech cadence, "Looks like we have the same great taste." And I didn't scream. I just stared at him, at this blank, unassuming man who had systematically tried to become me. I felt like I was looking at a copy of myself that wanted to delete the original. I called the police. They talked to him, but what could they do? There was no direct threat. It wasn't a crime to have the same haircut or buy the same car. He claimed the jacket was a gift he had ordered for himself and was delivered to my door by mistake. There was no proof of the hacking. I broke my lease the next day, paying a massive penalty. I moved across the city to a new apartment, a place with no neighbors next to me. I've changed everything about my appearance and my routines. But sometimes, when I'm out in public, I'll see a dark gray Mazda 3 or a pair of brightly colored running shoes, and the panic comes rushing back, cold and absolute. For my 7-year-old son Noah and me, life hadn't been easy. After leaving a volatile and emotionally abusive marriage, I took what little savings I had and moved us to a small rental house in a quiet, working-class neighborhood 3 towns over. It was our fresh start, a place to heal. But as a single mother in an unfamiliar place, a low-level hum of anxiety was my constant companion. The house was modest, but felt safe, though the quiet nights, where every creak of the old floorboards seemed amplified, often felt more lonely than peaceful. This is precisely why my next-door neighbor Dennis seemed like a blessing from heaven in those first few weeks. Dennis was a friendly, helpful, middle-aged man who was always tinkering in his garage. The day I moved in, he was the first to come over, introducing himself with a warm smile and insisting on helping me with the heavy boxes, chiding me for trying to do it all myself. In the weeks that followed, he became my unofficial handyman and guardian angel. When my kitchen faucet started a maddening drip, 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 Dennis fixed it. When I forgot to bring my garbage cans in from the curb, he quietly rolled them back up to the house. He often made a point of telling me he kept an eye on things in the neighborhood. "I'm a night owl," he'd say with a reassuring smile, leaning on the fence that separated our yards. "Don't you worry, Sarah. I see everything that goes on around here. You and the boy are safe." I felt an incredible wave of relief and gratitude. In a world where I felt completely alone and vulnerable, I had a kind, protective neighbor watching out for us. I felt incredibly lucky. Then small, unlucky things started happening. One morning, I came out to find my car's front tire was completely flat. I was in a full-blown panic, on the verge of being late for a new job I desperately needed to keep. As if on cue, Dennis appeared from his garage, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Well, now that's no good," he said in a calm, steady voice. "Looks like you picked up a nail." He spent the next 10 minutes changing the tire for me, refusing any payment, just smiling and telling me that's what neighbors are for. He was my hero. A week later, a package containing a birthday gift for Noah was stolen from my porch. I was distraught. Dennis came over, his face a mask of genuine concern. "I saw a suspicious-looking kid in a hoodie hanging around earlier," he said, shaking his head. "Don't worry. I have a security camera pointed at the street." He later showed me a grainy, useless video of a blurry, hooded figure dashing past. The incident just reinforced my sense of living in an unsafe world and my complete reliance on Dennis, my watchful protector. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to notice a strange, unsettling pattern. The dangers and unlucky incidents only seemed to happen after I had shown a bit of independence, or when I was feeling particularly happy. I had an old friend from college over for dinner one night, the first time I'd entertained since the divorce. The next morning I found my garden hose slashed and neatly coiled on the lawn. I mentioned to Dennis that I was thinking of getting a dog for protection. A few days later, I found a disturbing anonymous typed note in my mailbox about a recent string of dog nappings in the area. He seemed to thrive on my fear, and my subsequent effusive gratitude when he would inevitably show up to offer his help and comfort. My unease grew into a cold dread the day I overheard him talking to Noah over the fence. "You know, little man," Dennis said in a conspiratorial whisper, "if you're ever scared, especially if your mommy isn't home, you use our special knock." I watched from the kitchen window as he demonstrated a strange rhythmic pattern on the wooden fence. "That's our secret. It'll bring me running to help faster than anyone." The thought of this man encouraging my son to have secrets with him, positioning himself as Noah's primary protector, made my skin crawl. The final straw came when I started dating again. I met a kind man named Paul. After our third date, he walked me to my door. As he was leaving, I saw the curtain in Dennis's living room window twitch. The next day, I came home from work to find my back door ajar, the window pane in it shattered. Nothing was stolen. It was an act of pure violation. Dennis, of course, was the first on the scene, having heard the glass break from his garage. He helped me board up the window, shaking his head. "A single mom like you has to be so careful," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "It's a good thing I'm here, isn't it?" That night, Paul called. "This might sound crazy," he said, "but that neighbor of yours, it's a little weird that he's always there when something bad happens, isn't it?" Hearing someone else voice my deepest, most suppressed fear was the validation I needed. I wasn't being ungrateful. Something was deeply wrong. The next day I bought the best high-resolution Wi-Fi-enabled security camera I could afford. Without telling Dennis, I hid it in a small birdhouse my son had painted, its lens perfectly positioned to overlook my driveway, my porch, and the side of my house. I didn't have to wait long. The first night the camera captured everything. I sat at my kitchen table the next morning, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, and watched the downloaded footage on my laptop. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m. The video showed a figure dressed in dark clothes and a black ski mask creeping silently into my yard. The figure moved with a familiar, confident gait. It went to my car and, with a small, sharp tool, carefully and quietly punctured the sidewall of my front tire. Then the figure moved to my porch, picked up a small package that had been delivered the day before, and tucked it under its arm. It slinked back towards the property line. Just before disappearing into the shadows of his own yard, the figure stopped, pulled off the ski mask, and looked around, his face placid in the moonlight. It was Dennis. After hiding the package in his garage, he came back out. For 10 terrifying minutes, the footage showed him walking a slow, proprietary circuit around my house, peering into each dark window, his hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't just a saboteur, he was a warden, inspecting his prison. He went back into his house. The footage showed that a few hours later, at 7:30 a.m., when I would normally be leaving for work, his garage door opened, and he was there, ready to play the hero once again. He was the arsonist who loved to play the fireman. He had been manufacturing my nightmares, creating a private stage where he could be my savior, my indispensable guardian. My fear was instantly replaced by a cold, clarifying rage. I didn't confront him. I took the video file to the police. I will never forget the look on the officer's face as he watched the footage, his initial skepticism melting into disbelief and then disgust. I have a restraining order against Dennis now, and I'm breaking my lease to move to a new town. But the horror of that realization will never leave me. For months, the danger I feared was a random, external threat from the world. But the real monster wasn't the stranger in the hoodie or the imaginary burglar. It was the man who brought me brownies and fixed my faucet, It was the safety I ran to, the protector I trusted, and I'm left with the chilling knowledge that sometimes the greatest threat is the person who works the hardest to make you believe you need them to survive.